Being a high rank in a game is actually a big red flag, but if you want to accumulate those imaginary points and climb through the ranks to reach Grandmaster, or if you just want to get the shiny Moon Knight skin, here are some key tips that are going to help you improve at Marvel Rivals. I didn't want to rush out this video just to give you guys a guide on day 1 that lacked substance and I didn't have any time with the game. By now I've put a lot of time into the game and I've reached high rank, so I'm confident that I can give you guys some good insight on how to improve at the game. With that being said, the very first tip that I have for you, and I know it's going to sound very basic, but I see a lot of players, especially the flanking duelists, not using, and that is quite simply always be shooting. Now, if you are a melee character, of course, this is going to be a little bit different, but even if you are playing as a flanking character like Psylocke or Star-Lord, you always want to be damaging the enemies because that is going to apply some additional pressure on the strategist to heal the enemy team, and while you are doing it, you're going to be building up your ultimate, because, and that is the second tip, even though you might be playing a flanking character, it's not always a good idea to go for the flank. When doing so, you need to pay attention to whatever is happening around your team and the enemy team. You don't want to dive the enemy team while there is no action going on. You want to wait for your vanguards to make up some space and have the enemy team's attention being drawn to them. And only once they use certain cooldowns are you free to go in, because otherwise, especially if you are playing against a Mantis or a Luna Snow, you're going to be stunned and taken out in an instant. So another tip to add to that is that if you are playing as a flanking hero, you should always have an escape plan ready. So whether you are playing with Psylocke or Black Panther, for example, both of these characters have an ability that they can essentially use as a get out of jail free card. With Psylocke you have 2 dashes and the invisibility, and with Black Panther you have 2 dashes, one that is refreshed each time you hit an enemy that is marked. So be careful with your ability usage, and when you go for a dive, even if you get a kill or 2, make sure that you save a cooldown just to be able to get out of there, because otherwise the enemies might end up getting a pick on you, and you likely won't get as much value for your team out of the eliminations that you ended up getting. It's also important to talk about target priority, which I think is a very big mistake that I often see players doing. And this is all the way up to the diamond ranks. People are still doing this there. I'm sorry to break it to you, but even when you go up higher in the ranks, people still end up doing the same mistakes, and there's really a lot of bad players everywhere. What I mean by this is that a lot of times you'll see especially duelists talking about them doing a good job just because of their damage number at the end of the match. However, if you're simply firing at a tank and never really getting any solid picks or eliminations, you are really not contributing much to the team. Yes, it is important to still damage the vanguard if there is no one else for you to shoot at, but ideally you would be saving your bigger cooldowns to engage on the enemy duelists or the strategists, as without them the majority of the game's tanks don't really have a lot of damage, nor do they pose a big threat to your team. So again, don't pay as much attention to the damage numbers at the end of the match and try to focus on eliminations. Now, on the other hand of the spectrum, if you are playing as a vanguard, your biggest goal is to make space for your team, allowing your fellow Hawkeye or Hela to go up into the high ground to have a better angle on the enemy team, or just not giving room for the enemy team to damage your backline with some big shields. That being said, something that I see a lot of tank players not really taking into account is that the strategists that they play with have different cooldowns. While yes, some strategists can continuously heal their allies, like Luna Snow or Cloak and Dagger, others like Adam Warlock or Mantis have big cooldowns that they need to pay attention to. So especially if you're playing as a vanguard, do try to understand the type of strategist that you have on your own team, as if you are constantly standing in the way of enemy fire, the enemy team is eventually going to burn through all of your strategist's cooldowns and they won't be able to sustain you for a very long time. Or maybe they will be able to do so, but they won't be able to heal the rest of the team, leading to your allied duelists having to take cover because they're low health, and thus they're not able to put pressure on the enemy team, and they will be able to eventually advance and take the point. It's also especially important for the flanking duelists or the flyers to also be keenly aware of everyone's position on their team, as different strategists are able to heal at different ranges, and again, some of them have different cooldowns, so they won't always be able to heal you given any position you might be in. For this reason, it's also imperative that you make the conscious decision to look behind you every now and again, and that is whether you are a duelist, a strategist, or a vanguard. It's important for all of these roles, and I know that this sounds very basic, but the amount of times that I've been side by side with a strategist and they're not healing me because because they're not looking around is pretty crazy, and again we're talking about being in high rank. Well, the same thing happens if you're playing as a Vanguard or a Duelist, especially if you dive the enemy backline. You need to pay attention to your own backline because they might also be being dove by the enemy team. Maybe there is a Venom, a Psylocke, or a Black Panther, whatever it might be, and the strategists of your own team might not be able to go up and heal you. Or for example, if the enemy team has a Groot, if you as a Duelist go in and try to dive the enemy backline, the Groot is going to isolate you from the rest of the team, and the strategists are not going to have line of sight to be able to heal you. So again, it is incredibly important to be consciously aware of everyone's position all of the time. On that note, I should also mention that some heroes are better played for offense versus defense. So for example, one character that I do believe is fantastic on offense is the Winter Soldier, being able to dish out a lot of damage, using his E as a projectile that can pierce through enemies and deal a lot of damage, and also being able to pull an enemy towards you and easily one-shotting them. And naturally, another powerful offensive pick would be the Hulk, being able to easily dive the enemy team and putting a lot of pressure while also offering some defensive utility. Well, if you are playing on defense, another character that might be very good would be, for example, for the Duelists, Punisher, who can set up a turret in the right position to deal with the enemy's offense, so they have to choose either to take cover or deal with your turret dealing a ton of damage, with the only real way to deal with you being to send an assassin to go into the backline, but that of course has its risks and you are dividing the enemy team. Another great defensive pick, especially in the lower elos, would be Penny Parker, who can set up traps in the different mines and also cover the field in her webs that allow her to get increased movement speed and passive healing. However, when the roles are reversed, especially when it comes to the latter pick, it becomes a little bit more difficult for you to play Penny Parker on offense, because in order for you to effectively set up the mines in a way that they are beneficial to your team, you need to move up and make space on the enemy team. So these are all things that you need to take into account when deciding which hero to pick. Now, another big tip that I have for you that, again, I see a lot of people doing this mistake, is to save your ultimate for when they are truly valuable. That is, for example, when you are trying to capture the objective on domination, or when you are trying to get that final push on overtime for your payload. Because I see a lot of people using their ultimates for no real reason. Because yes, you might still get a pick or two here and there, but because there are still 3 more minutes remaining until the enemy team can take the payload that is already taken by your own team, it's not really worth it for you to use your ultimate in those situations. Try to save them for when the big objectives are being contested, or to counter an enemy team's ultimate, especially if you are playing someone like Luna Snow or Mantis, which their ultimates are absolutely insane, but at the same time you can also force the enemy team to use their ultimates at the wrong time. So for example, if you're playing Psylocke, you can dive the enemy team and use your own ultimate, which will force the Luna Snow or the Mantis to use their ultimates. And you might think that doing this is not very worth it, as you might only get 1 or 2 kills or not even that. But I promise you, if you end up making it so that Mantis or Luna Snow waste their ultimates because of you, you are doing a great job, because those ultimates are completely game changing. And so one thing that you need to get used to, especially as you go up in ranks, is to not expect to get a lot of kills out of your ultimate, but more so to put pressure on the enemy team. Make them use their big cooldown so you can get a big push, and so that your own strategists can also save their cooldowns for a later fight or to contest a future objective. And naturally, when using these ultimates, it's important to coordinate them with your team. So, and I know a lot of people dislike when I say this, but turn on voice chat and communicate to your team that you have your ultimate and you want to coordinate it with someone else. Like for example, a Groot ulting with Psylocke is going to allow you to deal a lot more damage, as the enemies won't be able to escape. Or if you are using defensive ultimates, especially with the revive from Adam Warlock, try not to save them until the very last minute, because I see a lot of strategists using their ultimates kind of like a panic button, where they see 1 or 2 teammates die and they want to use their ultimate to try to maintain their point, when you should instead use your ultimate a little bit sooner before your team dies and you see the enemy team using big cooldowns to try to shut you down. When you do these ultimates, it's a bit hard to conceptualize these types of ultimates, but when you use them, you are essentially doing so to maintain momentum, not giving the enemy team a chance to get a pick or 2, even when they use their big cooldowns. This is something that you're going to need to learn as you play the game, as it is going to be different on a case-by-case scenario. But again, just make sure that you always pay attention to how your team is doing, to try to have as much impact with your character as you possibly can. Now, another big thing that I often see people doing wrong all of the time, and that is especially important for defensive cooldowns. So one big example is Doctor Strange using their portal at the wrong time, as that can be an incredible tool that allows your team to get an advantage over the opposition in many different ways, either by covering one of the big directions from which the enemy team can come in, or just using the portal as a way way for your team to get back from spawn a lot quicker, or maybe to flank the enemy backline. If you use it at the wrong time, you're going to deal with a huge cooldown and your value is going to be diminished. That is the same for all of the other characters, just in different ways, with two of the biggest perpetrators in this case being Mantis and Luna Snow, as they have the ability to shut down an enemy by putting them to sleep or stunning them and allowing your team to delete them if they are a squishy character, or if they are a Vanguard for example, you can ignore them and make the fight a 6v5 for 2 seconds. And I often see these Mantis and Luna Snow players using these cooldowns at the wrong time, either by stunning a duelist that is far away and is close to a strategist that is going to be able to heal them up, or by CCing a Vanguard too soon, as if you just stun them when they are full HP, you're not really going to accomplish much. One of the biggest opportunities that you have is when you are up against a Venom. Their game plan is very simple. They're going to dive the enemy team, and when they get low on HP, they use their E to generate a lot of bonus health. And the lower they are, the more bonus HP they're going to get. Well, I see a lot of Mantis and Luna Snow players using their stun as soon as they are being dove by the Venom, when they should instead wait for the Venom to get low on HP, and only then should you use your stun. But again, also make sure that you do it before the Venom hits their E. This type of decision making and game sense is going to become more important as you climb up the ranks, so you need to be on point with these especially impactful abilities. Now, a very big aspect of the game that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of is the different team-ups and the abilities that you get from doing this. With one of the biggest, for example, being Hela being able to provide bonus health for Thor or Loki, or even revive them if they are on the same team. Some of these bonuses are insane, but what you need to know is that the anchor characters, that is the characters that are on the left with this yellow icon, they get the season bonus regardless of whether or not these team-up pairs are active. Think of these as essentially bonus passives that you get on your character whenever you pick them during a certain season. So right now on season 0, one of the biggest seasonal bonus is the 20% damage boost that you get on Hela by just selecting her. And the same thing goes for Hawkeye, which might be the reason why these two are so powerful, but that's a discussion for another time. So again, keep in mind that you don't need these pairings to get that bonus, although you should try to get the team up bonuses for some of these pairings, as one example that I showed you in my previous video where combining Hulk, Iron Man and Doctor Strange is one of the most powerful combinations in the entire game. Although you should not feel urged to play a character you don't often play and don't understand very well, you should instead go with the characters that you are comfortable with, as you are more likely than not going to get better results from them. Now, the next tip that I have for you is going to be a very practical one that depends on the characters you're using, but just know that a lot of characters have melee cancels in the game. That is to say that you can cancel the end portion of some animations by doing another attack at the same time. So for example, with Psylocke, whenever you left click, you throw out these daggers like this, or these shurikens rather, and whenever you left click, you get these set of 2 different hits. Well, I can do this, where I cancel too early into my right click, but I can also cancel the end portion of the animation of the left click by like this, making it much tighter and allowing me to get more damage in an instant. I can also do it with a melee attack like this. And this is especially important for characters that have a slow rate of fire, like Doctor Strange for example, where you are able to use your melee attack in between every single left click you do, just to get some extra damage on the enemy while also building up your dark magic meter. These types of cancels are going to be different from character to character, but it's important that you learn them to get the most value out of them, as comboing different abilities and weaving in your melee attacks at the right time is going to allow you to output much more damage and thus have an advantage over the enemy team. Another big thing that everyone needs to be wary of is the way in which you aim at the enemy, as because of the third-person perspective, you might still hit your enemy if you're aiming at the right side of them like this. As you can see, my crosshair is nowhere near Hulk, but I'm still able to damage him. However, if I aim at the left side of Hulk, as you can see, I completely miss him like this. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, just look at the difference here. And this also applies to not just the abilities you aim at the enemies, but also your dashing ability. Because if I dash to the left here, I'm going to miss Hulk. However, if I dodge, let's say here to the right side of Hulk, I'm still going to hit him. So you should make a conscious effort to always aim at the right side of your enemies, as you are going to get a lot more value out of your abilities and your character by doing this. If you want to practice this, my advice is to go into a quick match or two and try to only aim at the right side of the enemies and not the enemies themselves to try to figure out just how accurate you need to be for this to land. Now my next tip is going to be to abuse the third-person camera that you have in this game, because while you are hugging this wall, for example, you can peek around the corner like this without the enemy team seeing you, and this is going to be especially important for the big duelists and the flankers that want to know where the enemy team is so that they can go in at the right time to one-shot them. Like this. It is of course, because of the third-person camera perspective, a little bit more difficult to do so on the left side of the screen. So when you do it like this, it's a lot harder for you to notice where the enemy is coming from, but you can still get some info out of this and get a lot of value. So it is a good habit for you to develop as a player. Another great habit for you to develop as a player is, for one, to stop jumping in the middle of team fights, as doing this is simply going to take you away from cover, and instead the way in which you should be using jumping is to jump around corners like this, making it much harder for the enemy team to know where you're coming from as you're trying to jump in and trying to damage them, kind of like this, as it is going to be a lot safer for you to do this other than just coming around the corner like this. But when fighting on an open field in a 1v1 like this, you want to make sure that you don't jump all over the place and instead use the small pieces of cover that you can find to get any advantage possible. It's also important for you to know that some characters have the ability to take reduced damage with some abilities, and some others even have the ability to take no damage at all, having iframes throughout the duration of some animations. So for example, Star-Lord's right click where you do this vaulting animation has you being completely immune to damage. It's a bit hard to showcase here against this bot, but as long as I'm jumping here, I'm not going to take damage from anything that the enemies throw at me. Another such example is of course Cloak and Dagger, with you being able to cloak yourself and your allies, making it so that none of you take damage even though you might be getting shot at or being hit with an ultimate, or you of course having the ability to parry pretty much anything with Iron Fist. You should go through every character and learn about these key abilities so that you know which characters can become invulnerable or resistant to damage, so you don't waste important cooldowns on them, or so that you take advantage of these important cooldowns when you're using these characters. And these are some of my best tips that are going to help you climb through the ranks in Marvel Rivals. Stay tuned, as I do have plenty of videos coming up where I'm going to be showcasing some unique tricks that you can do and some unique interactions with different heroes that are going to allow you to have an advantage over your opponents. So if you are enjoying the Marvel Rivals content, please subscribe to the channel.